Commander Park. Hannah stared at the glowing screen in front of her, her heart pounding as she watched the alien message play for the third time. The communication bay of Terra Station was usually quiet, but today it buzzed with nervous energy. Scientists, military officers, and linguists crowded around the holographic display, all trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The message had traveled across impossible distances, taking months to reach Earth. It came from something called the Villani Republic, and what Park Hannah saw made her stomach turn. Entire planets were on fire. Beautiful cities with crystal spires crumbled as dark shapes swarmed across their surfaces like hungry locusts. "Lieutenant Kim Jun, what do we know about these aliens?" she asked, her voice steady despite the horror playing out on screen. Kim Jun looked up from his analysis station, his young face pale. "It's incredible, Commander. They're completely peaceful creatures. Plant eaters, every single one of them. 7 different species working together, but none of them have ever fought a war. Not once in their entire history." Park Hannah watched as the alien creatures in the transmission fled in panic. They looked almost like walking flowers, with crystalline skin that sparkled in the light of their burning cities. Their technology was clearly advanced. Their ships moved without visible engines. Their buildings seemed to grow rather than being constructed. But they had no weapons, no defenses, no concept of fighting back. "Their technology is centuries ahead of ours," Kim Jun continued, his fingers flying over the keyboard as more data appeared. "They can travel between stars in days, not years. They've mastered energy manipulation, biological engineering, even time dilation. But they've never needed to build anything that could hurt someone else." The transmission showed something else now. The enemy. Dark, insect-like creatures that moved in perfect coordination, like parts of a single massive organism. They covered planets like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Cities, forests, oceans, nothing was left behind. "They call it the Void Swarm," Kim Jun explained. "It's like a hive mind, all connected, all thinking as one. It doesn't negotiate, doesn't communicate, just eats. Entire civilizations disappear in weeks." Park Hannah watched as the peaceful Villani tried everything they could think of. They sent diplomats to meet the swarm. The diplomats never returned. They evacuated their people to hidden colonies. The swarm found them anyway. They tried to hide their planets using advanced technology. It didn't matter. The hungry creatures always found them. 12 worlds gone already," she whispered, reading the data scrolling across her screen. "Billions of innocent people." Captain Lee Minji entered the communication bay, her boots clicking against the metal floor. She'd been in emergency meetings all morning with Earth's military leaders. "What's our assessment?" she asked. "They're desperate," Park Hannah replied. "They've tried everything they know how to do. Diplomacy, hiding, running away, nothing works. Now they're reaching out to us." "Why us?" Lee Minji asked, though something in her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Kim Jun pulled up another screen showing Earth's radio signals that had spread across space over the past century. "They've been listening to our broadcasts, our music, our movies, our news reports. They know what kind of planet we come from. Earth was what scientists called a death world, a planet so dangerous that every creature on it had evolved to fight for survival. Humans weren't the strongest or fastest species in the galaxy, but they were something the peaceful Villani had never encountered before. Natural warriors who understood violence. They know we fight wars, Park Hannah said quietly. They know we understand conflict in ways they never will. We're probably the most violent species they've ever discovered, and right now, that's exactly what they need. The transmission ended with a simple message translated into broken English. Please help. We do not know how to fight. Our children are dying. You are our only hope. The communication bay fell silent. Everyone understood what they were looking at an entire civilization begging for help from the one species that might be able to save them. The gentle, advanced Villani had never needed to learn violence, but the creatures attacking them had never faced organized resistance from people who understood war. Captain Li Mingi walked to the quantum communicator, her hand hovering over the activation switch. Around the room, officers and scientists held their breath. This decision would change everything, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. "Prepare the response beacon," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's commitment. "Tell them we're coming." As the message began transmitting across impossible distances, Park Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. Earth was about to show the galaxy what Deathworlders could do when innocent people needed protection. Admiral Choi Sung had seen many briefings in his 30 years of military service, but nothing had prepared him for this. The war room at Earth Command was packed with humanity's top military minds, all staring at holographic displays that showed a nightmare unfolding across distant star systems. Red dots marked dead worlds, while yellow ones showed planets under attack. The blue dots representing safe Alani worlds were disappearing one by one. The alien delegates stood at the center of the room, and Choi still couldn't get used to how they looked. The Villani were tall and graceful, almost like living sculptures made of crystal and light. Their skin shimmered with colors that changed based on their emotions, and right now, those colors were all shades of fear and desperation. Counselor Thylon was their leader, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with features that seemed carved from precious gems. When she spoke, her voice came through a translation device that made her words sound hollow and strange, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. "We tried to run," she whispered, her crystalline hands shaking. "When the first world fell, we thought it was just bad luck. When the second world died, we began evacuation plans. By the time we understood what we were facing, it was too late to save so many." The holographic display showed images that made even hardened soldiers uncomfortable. The Void Swarm wasn't like any enemy humanity had ever faced. They weren't just killing for territory or resources, they were consuming everything. Cities, forests, oceans, even the atmosphere itself disappeared into their hungry mass. "They consume not just flesh," Thylon continued, her voice breaking. "They take our knowledge, our memories, everything that makes us who we are. When they finish with a world, it's as if our people never existed at all." Major Hanyuki, Earth's top tactical analyst, had been studying the attack patterns for hours. She looked up from her datapad with a grim expression. "This isn't random destruction. Look at these targeting priorities. They hit nurseries first, then schools, then cultural centers. They're not just hunting for food." She pulled up detailed maps showing how the swarm attacked each world. "They go after the children first, then the teachers, then anyone who holds knowledge. It's like they understand that destroying a civilization's future is more effective than just killing everyone at once." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The assembled fleet commanders, men and women who had fought in conflicts across human space, recognized the pattern. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal. "Our children, ... Phylan's voice became almost inaudible. "They take our children first, because they know we will do anything to save them. We expose ourselves trying to protect the young ones, and then the swarm takes us all." Admiral Choi had seen humanity's darkest moments during the resource wars and the colonial rebellions. He'd witnessed cities burned and populations displaced. But this was different. This was systematic extinction designed to cause maximum suffering. "How many worlds do you have left?" he asked. Though he dreaded the answer, Thailand's colors shifted to deeper shades of blue and purple. Colors the humans had learned meant profound sadness. 15 worlds still have our people, but 3 of those are already under attack. The swarm moves faster now, like it's learned from each conquest how to be more efficient. "Timeline, Major?" Hanyuki asked, her fingers flying over her computer as she ran calculations. "In what you call weeks, 3 more worlds will fall," the alien counselor replied. "The swarm has grown larger with each victory. It learns from what it consumes. Our own knowledge is being used against us." The war room buzzed with quiet conversations as Earth's military leaders processed this information. They were looking at the complete extinction of not just one species, but 7 different civilizations that had worked together for thousands of years. "After those 3 worlds fall," Thailand added, her voice barely a whisper, "the swarm will be too large and too knowledgeable for anyone to stop. Our remaining worlds will fall in days, not weeks." And then, she didn't need to finish. Everyone in the room understood. After the Villani Republic was consumed, the swarm would look for new prey, and Earth's radio signals had been broadcasting humanity's location for over a century. Admiral Choi looked around the room at his commanders. These were people who understood war, who had studied every conflict in human history. They recognized what they were seeing, a perfect predator that had never faced real resistance. "Recommendations?" he asked. The answer was unanimous. Humanity was going to war. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, everything changed. Dr. Songhai sat at her monitoring station aboard the science vessel Soul's Pride, watching her screens light up with panicked alien communications. The Villani had been expecting help, but they hadn't been prepared for what humanity considered a rescue fleet. "Captain Nam Wu, you need to hear this," she called out, her voice tight with concern. The alien chatter was coming in so fast that the translation computers were struggling to keep up. Captain Nam Wu hurried over to her station, reading the translated messages as they scrolled across the screen. His expression grew troubled as he saw what the aliens were saying about their would-be rescuers. "They're calling us death singers," Dr. Songhai explained, pulling up the linguistic analysis. "It's hard to translate exactly, but their word for our ships means something like beautiful nightmares or deadly art. They've never seen anything like our fleet before, and it was easy to understand why." The human ships were nothing like Villani vessels, which looked organic and peaceful, designed for exploration and trade. Human warships were built for one purpose: to destroy enemies as efficiently as possible. They were angular and sharp, covered in armor plating that made them look like enormous weapons floating through space. The flagship, Indomitable, looked especially intimidating. Admiral Choi's vessel was a massive battleship with weapon ports covering every surface. Its hull was scarred from previous battles, and radiation from its massive engines made the space around it shimmer like heat waves. To beings who had never seen a warship before, it must have looked like something from their worst nightmares. "Look at this communication from their lead vessel," Dr. Songhai said, highlighting a message from Harmony's light. "They're maintaining maximum safe distance. They want to help coordinate the defense, but they're afraid to get too close to us." Through the viewport, they could see the Villani ship in the distance. It was beautiful in its own way, made of crystalline materials that caught and reflected starlight, but it looked fragile next to the human warships, like a flower growing next to a tank. Admiral Choi's voice crackled through the communication system, speaking directly to the alien commander. "Counselor Thailand, we've arrived as requested. What's your current tactical situation?" The alien's response came through shaky and uncertain. "Admiral, we are grateful for your arrival, but your vessels frighten us more than the swarm does. We did not expect. We did not know that your people built such terrible things." There was a long pause before Admiral Choi replied, and when he did, his voice was deadly serious. "Good. Fear is the beginning of respect, and respect will keep you alive when the shooting starts." Dr. Songhai shivered at the Admiral's words. She understood what he meant. The Villani needed to understand that war was serious business, but seeing the aliens' terror made her realize just how different humanity was from the rest of the galaxy. Through the observation windows of various human ships, the Villani could see human marines conducting training exercises. The soldiers moved with deadly precision, practicing combat maneuvers that would have been unthinkable to the peaceful aliens. They worked in perfect coordination, each movement designed to maximize damage to enemies while protecting allies. "They're watching our people train," Captain Namwu observed, looking at the sensor readings that showed Villani ships maintaining surveillance on human activities. "I wonder what they think of our soldiers." The answer came through more intercepted communications. The aliens were describing human warriors as death dancers, and they couldn't understand how beings could move so gracefully while preparing to kill. To the Villani, it was like watching a beautiful performance that was designed to end lives. "Captain, we're getting reports from other ships in the fleet," Dr. Songhai said, reading new messages. "The aliens are analyzing our weapon systems, and they're having trouble believing what they're seeing. Some of our larger ships carry enough firepower to destroy entire moons." This was the reality of humanity's place in the galaxy. They had evolved on a world so dangerous that every creature was either a predator or prey, and humans had become the ultimate predators. Their ships, their weapons, their very way of thinking was shaped by millions of years of survival through violence. The Villani were learning that their saviors were possibly more dangerous than their enemies. The only difference was that humanity had chosen to use their deadly skills to protect others instead of conquering them. As the two fleets prepared to coordinate their defense, the galaxy was about to witness what happened when Deathworlders went to war for someone else's freedom. The attack came faster than anyone expected. Captain Park-jun was reviewing defense plans when alarms started screaming across his ship. Through the bridge windows, he could see something that made his blood run cold. A wall of living darkness spreading across 3 Villani worlds at once. "Sir, you need to see this," Lieutenant Shin Ara called from her station, her voice tight with disbelief. The tactical display showed what looked like a plague of insects, but each insect was the size of a fighter jet. There were billions of them, maybe trillions, moving in perfect coordination as they descended on the peaceful colonies below. Captain Park-jun watched in horror as the creatures began their assault. They didn't land and set up bases like human armies would. Instead, they simply covered everything like a living carpet, consuming buildings, vehicles, and people with equal efficiency. Within minutes, entire cities were disappearing beneath the writhing mass. "They're not using any kind of strategy," Lieutenant Shin Ara observed, studying the enemy's movements. "No formations, no tactical planning, no attempts to control territory. It's just pure, overwhelming force, like watching a hurricane that can think." The swarm ships were unlike anything in human military databases. Instead of metal and engines, they seemed to be grown rather than built. They pulsed with organic rhythms, their hulls breathing like living tissue. Some looked like massive jellyfish floating through space, while others resembled giant insects with wings that caught starlight. "Admiral Choi to all ships," came the voice over the communication system. "The colonies are lost, but we can still save the people. All vessels, defensive formation Omega. Our job is to protect the evacuation ships, not to fight battles we can't win." This was the first test of the human Villani alliance, and it was happening under the worst possible circumstances. Thousands of Villani civilian ships were trying to escape the 3 doomed worlds, loaded with families who had barely escaped the swarm's advance. These ships were beautiful but fragile, designed for peaceful travel between worlds, not for running from predators. Captain Park-jun moved his destroyer into position between the fleeing civilians and the approaching swarm. Around him, other human ships did the same, forming a protective barrier of steel and weapons between the innocent and the hungry. "Captain Ko Min, this is Admiral Choi. The swarm is moving to intercept the evacuation convoy. We need someone to buy them time." "Understood, Admiral," came the reply from the destroyer Bizen's Fury. "We'll handle it." What happened next would be talked about in both human and Vellani history for generations. Captain Ko Min and his crew deliberately flew their ship directly into the largest swarm biovessel, a creature the size of a city that was moving to devour the fleeing civilians. The collision was like watching a sword strike a mountain, but it worked. The massive swarm creature reeled backward, damaged and confused. It had never encountered prey that fought back with such suicidal determination. For precious minutes, it focused on destroying Bizen's fury instead of chasing the evacuation. Ships giving thousands of Vellani families the time they needed to escape. Lieutenant Shinera watched the sacrifice with tears in her eyes. Captain Ko Min's ship is gone. But the evacuation convoy made it to the hyperspace jump point. They're safe. The Vellani watching from their own ships couldn't understand what they were seeing. These humans had known them for days, not years. They had no cultural connections, no shared history, no family ties. Yet human warriors were dying to save alien children they'd never met. Why? Counselor Thylan's voice came over the communication channel, filled with confusion and amazement. Why do your people sacrifice themselves for strangers? We don't understand this behavior. Dr. Songhai was coordinating rescue operations from her science vessel, directing human ships to pick up Vellani survivors from damaged evacuation craft. She paused in her work to answer the alien's question. Because that's what we do, she said simply. On our world, the strong protect the weak. It doesn't matter if they're the same species, or even from the same planet. When innocent people need help, humans help them. As more human reinforcements arrived and began engaging swarm forces across the system, the Vellani were learning something they'd never understood before. Warriors weren't just people who knew how to fight, they were people who chose to fight. For others, even when it cost them everything. The command center on Vellani Prime looked nothing like it had 3 weeks ago. What used to be a peaceful coordination hub for trade and cultural exchange had been transformed into a war room. Holographic displays showed battle formations, supply lines, and enemy movements across dozens of star systems. The air hummed with tension as humans and aliens worked side by side, preparing for battles that would determine the fate of entire civilizations. General Yoon Seo stood at the center of it all, surrounded by Vellani commanders whose crystalline features flickered, with colors that showed their confusion and fear. She had been tasked with something that seemed impossible, teaching warfare to beings who had never fought a single battle in their entire evolutionary history. Listen carefully, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought in conflicts across human space. War is not about destruction for the sake of destruction. It's about imposing your will on an enemy through controlled violence. The swarm just destroys everything. We have to be smarter than that. The holographic display showed a three-dimensional battlefield where red dots represented swarm forces and blue dots showed the combined human Vellani fleet. General Yoon Seo moved the pieces around like a chess master, demonstrating how proper tactics could defeat a numerically superior enemy. Commander Thylan, who had become the primary liaison between the species, watched with growing bewilderment. Her crystalline skin shifted through shades of purple and green colors that humans had learned meant deep confusion. General Yoon Seo, I must ask, she said in her melodic voice. Your ships and weapons appear designed for maximum destruction. How can you say war is not about destroying things? Before the general could answer, Colonel Park Da stepped forward, his fingers dancing over the holographic controls. New displays appeared, showing detailed specifications of human weapons and tactics. That's where you're wrong, he said firmly. Every human weapon, every ship design, every tactical doctrine we've developed over 10,000 years of warfare has one goal: ending conflicts as quickly as possible with the least amount of total suffering. He pulled up comparison charts, showing different approaches to the same military problem. Look at this. We could carpet bomb an enemy position and kill everything in a 100-mile radius. Or we can use precision strikes to eliminate only the specific targets we need to remove. Both approaches achieve the same military objective, but one saves millions of innocent lives. The Vellani commanders looked at each other with growing understanding. They had assumed that human weapons were crude instruments of mass destruction, but they were actually seeing the opposite, tools designed for surgical precision even in the midst of chaos. We're going to teach you concepts that might seem frightening. At first, General Yoon Seo continued. But remember, these are tools to protect your people, not to become like the swarm. Over the following hours, the humans introduced ideas that had never existed in Vellani society. They explained Feint's military operations designed to trick enemies into making mistakes. They demonstrated ambush tactics, using terrain and timing, to multiply the effectiveness of smaller forces. Most shocking of all, they discussed the strategic sacrifice of smaller units to preserve larger ones. The breakthrough moment came when Captain Li Tei's squadron encountered a massive swarm formation near the asteroid belt of a dead system. Instead of engaging directly, the human captain did something that amazed the Vellani observers. "Watch this carefully," Dr. Besu told her alien colleagues as they monitored the battle from the command center. "Captain Li Tei is going to show you how Deathworlders think about problems." The human squadron appeared to retreat in panic, flying directly into the asteroid field with the swarm in hot pursuit. The aliens thought they were seeing a rout, human ships fleeing in terror from superior numbers. But then Captain Li Tei activated pre-positioned charges that his engineers had been secretly placing throughout the asteroid field. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Billions of tons of rock became projectiles, moving at incredible speeds, shredding the pursuing swarm forces, while the human ships, following carefully calculated flight paths, emerged unharmed on the far side. "Impossible," whispered one of the Vellani commanders, her crystals shifting through rapid color changes that indicated shock and admiration. He turned the environment itself into a weapon. Dr. Besu nodded with satisfaction. "This is how Death approach every battle, as a puzzle to be solved, with the minimum necessary violence." Captain Li Tei didn't just defeat that swarm formation, he eliminated it completely, while losing none of his own people. The Vellani were beginning to understand that human warfare wasn't about brutality, it was about intelligence applied to conflict. Every battle was a problem with multiple solutions, and humans had spent millennia learning to choose the solutions that achieved their goals, while minimizing the cost in lives and resources. As the lessons continued, the peaceful aliens started to grasp concepts that would transform them from helpless prey into effective allies in the fight for their survival. The Battle of Kethmori would go down in galactic history as the moment everything changed. Admiral Choi stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching tactical displays that showed the largest swarm concentration anyone had ever seen. The enemy had learned from their previous defeats, adapting to human tactics with terrifying efficiency. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed their prey would always remain prey. "Sir, the swarm formation is massive," reported his tactical officer, her voice tight with concern. "Intelligence estimates over 10,000 bioships, plus support organisms. They've positioned themselves to cut off our supply lines to the remaining Vellani worlds." Admiral Choi studied the enemy formation with the calm focus of a predator, sizing up its target. The swarm had indeed learned from fighting humans. They no longer fell for simple feints or basic ambush tactics. Their formations were tighter, their responses more coordinated. But in learning to counter human tactics, they had revealed something important about themselves. They still thought like predators facing prey. "All ships, Formation Delta 7, he commanded, his voice carrying across the communication channels. "To 3 human battle groups and 2 Vellani fleets. Vellani vessels take point position. Your shields are stronger than ours, and we need the swarm to see what they expect to see." This was the moment of truth for the Alliance. Over the past month, Human engineers had been working around the clock to upgrade Villani ships with human weapons and targeting systems. The peaceful aliens had learned to use their superior defensive technology in combination with human offensive capabilities, creating something neither species could have achieved alone. Captain Song Min watched from the bridge of the battleship. New Seoul as the trap began to unfold. His ship was positioned with the other human vessels in what appeared to be a protective escort formation around the Villani fleet. To the swarm, it would look like the same pattern they had seen dozens of times before. Fragile alien civilians being protected by human warships, human ships, predator spacing. Admiral Choi continued. Make them think we're still operating under the old paradigm. Let them believe we're just protecting our allies instead of hunting alongside them. The swarm took the bait perfectly. Their massive formation began, moving to engage what they perceived as another routine evacuation convoy. Bioships the size of cities moved with the confidence of creatures that had never truly been challenged, their organic hulls pulsing with anticipation of another easy victory. They're coming in fast, Captain Song Min reported, watching as thousands of enemy vessels accelerated toward the Allied formation. Same attack pattern they've used before, overwhelming force concentrated on the human escorts, while secondary swarms moved to capture the Villani ships. But this time was different, as the swarm closed to weapons range, expecting the Villani ships to flee while human vessels formed a defensive screen. Something unprecedented happened. The crystalline alien vessels suddenly rotated, presenting their heavily armed sides to the enemy formation. All Villani ships, weapons free, came the calm voice of Commander Thailand. Show them what prey looks like when it learns to hunt. The transformation was shocking. Beams of pure energy, guided by human targeting systems, carved through swarm formations with surgical precision. The peaceful Villani had learned to use their advanced technology as weapons, and their strikes were devastating. Ships that had been designed for exploration and trade were now delivering death with the efficiency of purpose-built warships. At the same time, human vessels abandoned their defensive positions and struck from angles the swarm had never anticipated. Instead of protecting static targets, they moved like a coordinated pack, each ship supporting the others while maximizing damage to the enemy. Lieutenant Cho Hanna, monitoring enemy communications from her intelligence station, suddenly looked up with wide eyes. Admiral, you need to hear this. I'm picking up swarm communications, and they're there, panicking. The intercepted messages came through the translation system in broken fragments, but the meaning was clear. Impossible. The swarm hive mind was broadcasting. The prey species hunts. The prey species kills with precision. This violates the natural order. Prey does not become predator. For the first time in recorded history, the void swarm was retreating. Their formation broke apart as bioships fled in different directions, their hive minds struggling to process what it had witnessed. The perfect predators had encountered something their evolution had never prepared them for. Prey that had learned to hunt back. Captain Song Min watched the enemy withdraw with amazement. They're actually running. I didn't think that was possible. Admiral Choi allowed himself a small smile. We didn't just teach the Villani how to fight. We taught them to think like apex predators. And apex predators don't just defend, they hunt. The battle marked a fundamental shift in the war. The swarm would have to rethink everything they knew about galactic conflict, because the rules had just changed forever. Captain Jung Ho barely recognized the aliens around him as he walked through the corridors of the newest addition to their fleet. The ship itself was a marvel of cooperation, built with human military design principles, but powered by Villani technology that was centuries beyond anything Earth could produce. But it wasn't the ship that amazed him most. It was how much its crew had changed. 6 months ago, the Villani had been gentle beings who flinched at raised voices. Now, as he passed groups of alien soldiers, he saw creatures who moved with deadly purpose. Their crystalline skin which once showed only peaceful colors, now flickered with shades that humans had learned to associate with controlled aggression and tactical thinking. "Captain," called out one of the Vellani tactical officers, her colors shifting to the deep blues that indicated focused concentration. "We've identified a weakness in the swarm's defensive formation around the Zeta-9 system. If we coordinate a three-pronged assault, we can exploit their blind spot." Jung-Ho paused to look at the tactical display the alien was showing him. 6 months ago, this same being had been a civilian merchant who had never seen violence in her entire life. Now she was analyzing enemy positions with the cold calculation of a seasoned warrior. The transformation hadn't been easy to watch. The peaceful Vellani had struggled with concepts that came naturally to humans. The idea that sometimes you had to hurt others to protect the innocent, that resources were limited and had to be allocated strategically, that soldiers died in war, and you had to keep fighting, despite the loss. "We are no longer the people we were," Commander Thailand had said during the morning briefing, her voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there when they first met. "When this war ends and we return to our homeworlds, our children will not recognize us. We have learned to think thoughts that our species has never thought before." The change in Thailand herself was perhaps the most dramatic. She had once been a diplomat focused on peaceful negotiation and cultural exchange. Now she was a military commander who could order strikes that would kill thousands of enemies without hesitation. Her crystalline features had developed new expressions that didn't exist in Vellani emotional vocabulary before the war. Cold determination, calculated fury, and most unsettling of all, the satisfaction that came from a successful hunt. Admiral Choi had noticed the changes too. During their strategy sessions, he often looked at the alien commanders with something that might have been recognition. "War changes everyone," he had told Thailand when she expressed concerns about what her people were becoming. "The question isn't whether you'll be different, it's what you'll do with what you've learned. Will you use these skills to protect others, or will you become the very thing we're fighting against?" The war had indeed changed both species, but in different ways. Humans had always known how to fight, but working with the Vellani had taught them something new about why they fought. The aliens' initial innocence and genuine horror at violence had reminded human soldiers what they were protecting: not just territory or resources, but the right of peaceful beings to remain peaceful. For the Vellani, the transformation had been more dramatic. They had learned to think in terms of acceptable losses, strategic priorities, and the greater good. Concepts that had never existed in their culture were now part of their daily vocabulary. They understood now that sometimes good people had to do terrible things to prevent even worse things from happening. The combined fleet had pushed the swarm back through 17 star systems, but the cost had been horrific. Entire human squadrons had been lost in desperate last stands. Thousands of Vellani had died while learning to be warriors, their inexperience in combat proving fatal, despite their advanced technology. Colonel Kang Yu had just transmitted the latest casualty reports, numbers that would have been unthinkable to both species before the war began. But along with the grim statistics came something else: intercepted swarm communications that showed something unprecedented in their million-year history. "The hive mind is confused," Colonel Kang Yu reported. "Their communications show patterns we've never seen before. They're struggling to adapt to an enemy that violates everything they understand about the natural order. Prey species that have become predators, herbivores that hunt with the efficiency of carnivores. For the first time, the perfect predators were experiencing something they had no framework to understand: uncertainty, and perhaps even fear. The heart of the Void Swarm was unlike anything the combined fleet had ever encountered." Captain Omin stared at his sensor displays in disbelief as they approached what could only be described as a living galaxy. The swarm's central hive stretched across 3 entire star systems, its biostructures so massive that they had their own gravitational fields. Organic ships the size of moons orbited around, pulsing nerve centers that crackled with electrical activity visible from light years away. "Sir, we're picking up communications from the hive mind," reported his communications officer, her voice tense with excitement. "But they're different from anything we've intercepted before. The patterns are ... Captain Omin had been monitoring swarm communications for months, learning to recognize the cold, efficient coordination that marked their hive consciousness. But what he was hearing now was completely different. The signals were fragmented, contradictory, almost panicked. "They shouldn't exist," came the translated message, crackling across multiple frequencies simultaneously. "Prey that thinks like predators. Herbivores that kill like carnivores. The small soft ones teach the crystal singers to hunt. This is wrong pattern, wrong evolution." For the first time in the war, the swarm wasn't communicating like a single, unified intelligence. Different parts of the hive mind seemed to be arguing with each other, trying to process information that didn't fit into their understanding of how the universe worked. Dr. Kim Yoon, analyzing the psychological implications from her research station aboard the science vessel Discovery, was fascinated by what she was observing. "This is incredible," she told her colleagues. "We're not just winning battles against them, we've actually broken something fundamental in their worldview." She pulled up comparative analyses of swarm behavior from the beginning of the war versus their current actions. "Look at this data. For 1,000,000 years, they've been the perfect predator. They've consumed thousands of species across the galaxy, and every single one followed the same pattern. Prey runs, predator catches, predator consumes. They've never encountered organized resistance from their victims." The evidence was overwhelming. The swarm had evolved to be an unstoppable force of nature, like a living hurricane that devoured everything in its path. But hurricanes don't need to think tactically because nothing fights back against them. The hive mind had never developed the ability to adapt to enemies who could learn and evolve their tactics. "They're experiencing something they have no framework to understand," Dr. Kim Yoon continued. "Doubt, fear, uncertainty. These are emotions that predators develop when they encounter other predators. But the swarm has never been anything but the apex species." The psychological breakdown was manifesting in increasingly desperate tactics. Instead of their usual coordinated assaults, swarm forces were launching kamikaze attacks that wasted their numerical advantage. Even more disturbing, reconnaissance teams reported seeing swarm creatures consuming their own wounded. Behavior that suggested the hive mind was cannibalizing itself in its confusion. Most shocking of all, the swarm had attempted something completely unprecedented: negotiation. Their crude attempts at communication had been intercepted by Lieutenant Nam Sol, who specialized in xenolinguistics. "The messages are barely coherent," she reported during the daily briefing. "But they're definitely trying to establish some kind of dialogue. They're calling humans small soft warm ones, and referring to the Vellani as crystal singers. Listen to this latest transmission." The translated message played through the command center's speakers. "The small soft warm ones must be stopped. They make prey into predators. They make weakness into strength. They teach others the wrong songs of death harmony. This violates the natural order. The prey species must return to prey behavior." General Unesio listened to the desperate alien communication with grim satisfaction. She had been planning the final assault on the hive mind's central cluster, and this psychological intelligence was exactly what she needed. "Perfect," she said, studying the tactical displays that showed the massive biostructures ahead of them. "Fear makes them sloppy, and sloppy enemies make mistakes we can exploit." The irony wasn't lost on any of the human commanders. The Void Swarm, which had terrorized the galaxy for eons through pure predatory instinct, was now experiencing the same fear that their countless victims had felt. The difference was that humans and their Vellani allies knew how to use fear as a weapon. As the combined fleet prepared for the final battle, they knew they were facing an enemy that was no longer operating on pure instinct. The hive mind was making emotional decisions based on panic and confusion. exactly the kind of mistakes that skilled warriors could turn into victory. The perfect predators were about to learn what happened when the prey finally fought back with intelligence, determination, and the refusal to be consumed quietly. The final battle for the heart of the Void Swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For 3 straight days, the combined human-Valani fleet threw everything they had at the massive biostructures that housed the enemy's central consciousness. The fighting was so intense that space itself seemed to catch fire, with energy weapons, creating aurora-like displays across 3 star systems. Admiral Choi watched the carnage from her flagship's bridge, knowing that every decision she made would determine not just the outcome of this battle, but the future of countless civilizations. Half of their fleet was gone, ships destroyed, crews lost, entire squadrons that had fought together for months, now reduced to debris floating in the void. "Admiral, the central hive structure is showing critical damage," reported her tactical officer, exhaustion clear in her voice after 72 hours of continuous combat. "But we're detecting something strange. The swarm isn't just dying, it's changing." The most incredible thing had happened during the battle. As the hive mind tried desperately to understand how its prey had become predators, it had absorbed human concepts that its billion-year-old consciousness couldn't process. Ideas like individual choice, personal sacrifice, and fighting for others, rather than yourself, had proven to be more destructive than any weapon. Dr. Kim Yoon, monitoring the phenomenon from her damaged science vessel, watched in amazement as the readings came in. The hive consciousness is fragmenting. It's not being destroyed. It's learning individuality. And a hive mind that thinks as individuals stops being a hive mind. Across the battlefield, something unprecedented was happening. Billions of swarm creatures that had moved as one consciousness for their entire existence were suddenly thinking independent thoughts. Some fled in terror, others attacked their former allies, and still others simply stopped moving altogether, overwhelmed by the experience of being alone in their own minds for the first time. The great predator that had consumed entire civilizations was tearing itself apart, not through violence, but through the simple human concept that every being had the right to choose its own path. When the fighting finally ended, Admiral Choi stood on her battered bridge, looking out at a scene that would have been impossible to imagine when the war began. Valani medical ships were carefully tending to wounded human crews, while human engineers worked alongside alien technicians to repair damaged Valani vessels. The 2 species had become something neither had been alone, true allies forged in the crucible of shared sacrifice. Counselor Thailand, Admiral Choi, called to the alien commander, who had become not just her counterpart, but her friend. "The war is over. What will your people do now?" The crystalline being who had once trembled at the sight of human warships now carried herself with the quiet confidence of a veteran warrior. Her features had changed during the long campaign, developing expressions that had never existed in Valani culture before, the hard-earned wisdom that came from making life-and-death decisions for others. "We will remember," she said, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had experienced together. "And we will teach our children that sometimes peace must be defended with the tools of war. We can never again be the helpless people we once were." The combined fleet began its long journey home, but both species knew they were returning to worlds that would barely recognize them. The gentle Valani had learned to fight not just with weapons, but with the strategic thinking that had made humanity so effective in warfare. They would carry those lessons forward, ensuring that no future enemy could prey upon the innocent with impunity. For humanity, the war had taught them something equally valuable. Captain Park Hannah, now preparing the final report to Earth, realized that their greatest strength hadn't been their weapons or their tactics. It had been their ability to inspire others to become more than they thought possible. "Mission accomplished," she transmitted across the light years to Earth Command. "The prey learned to hunt, and the galaxy is safer for it." The Villani are no longer victims, they're guardians. In the cargo bay of the science vessel Soul's Pride, something beautiful was happening that symbolized the future both species were building together. Human and Villani children played side by side, the young ones who would inherit a universe fundamentally changed by their parents' sacrifice. These children would grow up in a galaxy where the strong protected the weak, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Where the difference between predator and prey wasn't determined by evolution or instinct, but by the moral choices each individual made. The war was over, but the alliance it had forged would endure for generations, ensuring that the galaxy's peaceful civilizations would never again face extinction alone.